The forest was silent except for the soft rustle of leaves and the occasional snap of a broken branch. Shadows twisted among the trees, casting long, dark fingers over the earth. From the darkness emerged Kaelira, a warrior whose reputation had spread like wildfire across kingdoms. Her eyes burned with a quiet fury, her movements fluid and deadly. Tonight, her target was the Alpha King's army, a force that had destroyed her village and taken the lives of those she loved. She moved like a storm, invisible, until it was too late. One by one, his soldiers fell under her precise strikes, their shouts swallowed by the night. The air was thick with tension, the smell of smoke, blood, and fear hanging heavy. Kaelira did not pause. She could not. Every step she took was measured, every swing of her blade precise. She was no ordinary warrior. She carried the weight of vengeance in her heart and the skill of a lifetime in her hands. From the high cliffs above the battlefield, the Alpha King, Draven, watched. His presence was commanding even from a distance. A man whose mere gaze could bend men to their knees. His armor glinted under the moonlight, dark and cold as the mountain stone around him. He had heard tales of Kaelira, but seeing her move, seeing the destruction she wrought upon his soldiers, stirred something inside him he did not expect. It was not fear, nor was it anger alone. It was fascination. "She moves like a shadow," Draven said, his voice low and measured. "And yet, there is fire in her eyes." His generals, standing near him, shifted uneasily. They had never seen him speak in such tones. Draven continued to watch, noting the way Kaelira fought with both precision and passion. How every swing of her blade told a story of loss, pain, and unyielding will. When the battle ended, silence settled over the forest. Kaelira stood alone among the fallen soldiers, her chest heaving, her hands slick with the evidence of her fury. She had won, but at a cost she had expected. The village that birthed her vengeance was gone, her family's faces forever etched into her memory. She would not cry. She could not. She had survived, and that was all that mattered now. Draven descended from the cliffs, his presence filling the clearing. He was a shadow made flesh, moving with the quiet authority of a predator. Kaelira's instincts screamed at her to attack, but something in the way he carried himself, the calm certainty in his eyes, made her hesitate. "Kaelira," he said, his voice both an order and a question. "You have done what none could. You have fought with skill, with passion, with courage. Yet, you stand in the midst of my soldiers' bodies, and still, you live." Kaelira did not respond. She did not lower her weapon, though she felt its weight like the weight of her own heart. She studied him as he studied her, two forces meeting in a silent storm. Draven's eyes, dark and penetrating, did not waver. "Clean her," he commanded to his men, his voice sharp as a blade. "Bring her to me." The soldiers hesitated. Kaelira had killed their comrades, and none wanted to obey an order that would bring them close to her. But none dared disobey the Alpha King. Slowly, cautiously, they moved forward, surrounding Kaelira. She did not resist. Not yet. Her mind was calculating, measuring the distance, the odds, the consequences. As she was led through the forest toward Draven's fortress, Kaelira's mind raced. This man, this king, was unlike any she had faced. His power was undeniable, his presence commanding. And yet, there was a strange pull she could not explain. She hated him for the lives he had taken, for the soldiers who had destroyed her world. But she could not deny the effect he had on her. The fortress rose from the cliffs like a blackened crown, its walls absorbing the moonlight, making it appear as though it had been carved from shadows themselves. Kaelira was led inside, her senses alert to every sound, every movement. She noticed the whispers of the servants, the careful way they avoided her gaze, the tension in the air. This was not merely a place of power. It was a place of danger, of secrets, and of impossible authority. Draven awaited her in the central hall, his figure framed by the flickering light of countless torches. He did not move to greet her. He merely watched, a silent storm contained within the walls of the fortress. Kaelira's heart beat faster, though she would not admit it even to herself. She had faced death before, had walked through fire and blood, yet the presence of this man stirred a fear she did not recognize, a fear mixed with curiosity, with challenge, with something else she could not name. "You have fought well," Draven said, his voice calm but heavy with command. "And yet, you are here, alive. That is no small feat." Kaelira's lips pressed into a thin line. She did not lower her eyes, though every instinct screamed at her to move, to strike, to escape. Instead, she stood tall, meeting his gaze as an equal, as a warrior who had seen the edge of death and returned. Draven studied her in silence. There was an intensity in her eyes that he recognized, a fire that mirrored his own. For centuries, he had ruled with power, with fear, with precision. Yet Kaelira's presence challenged something within him. He had long buried, a recognition of another soul who understood strength, loss, and the cost of command. "Do you understand why you are here?" Draven asked, stepping closer, though not threatening. His approach was deliberate, measured. "You have the choice to speak, to explain, or to remain silent." Kaelira did not speak. Her silence was as sharp as her blade, as revealing as it was defiant. She allowed him to study her, to weigh her spirit against his own. "You are bold," he said finally, "and perhaps more than bold. Perhaps you are dangerous in ways that even I must respect." The servants around them shifted uneasily, sensing the tension, sensing the unspoken battle between the two. It was not a battle of weapons, but of wills, of spirit and presence. Kaelira and Draven measured each other, two storms contained in a single hall, each waiting for the other to move, to falter, to reveal themselves. Finally, Draven spoke, his voice low and commanding. "Rest. You will need your strength. Tomorrow, we will speak again. There are matters of the kingdom, of your actions, and of your fate that must be decided." Kaelira's mind raced. Rest? Fate? Kingdom? She had come seeking vengeance, seeking justice. Yet here she was, surrounded by shadows, confronted by a man whose power and presence were unmatched. She hated him for the destruction. Yet she could not ignore the pull, the sense that this encounter was far greater than herself, greater than her vengeance. As the night deepened, Kaelira lay upon the hard floor of her chamber, listening to the distant echoes of the fortress. The torches flickered, the wind whispered through cracks in the walls, and somewhere, in the darkness, she sensed eyes upon her, not hostile, not welcoming, but watchful, waiting. For the first time in years, Kaelira felt a strange weight settle upon her heart. It was not fear alone, nor was it anticipation alone. It was a combination of all things she had denied herself: curiosity, caution, challenge, and an undeniable pull toward the man who had watched her destroy his soldiers without flinching. She knew the days to come would test her in ways she could not imagine. Not with blades alone, but with questions of loyalty, of trust, and of a strange, unwelcome longing that she could not yet name. Somewhere in the depths of the fortress, Draven watched, aware that the storm he had summoned to his halls was unlike any he had encountered. She was not merely a warrior. She was fire, shadow, and will, and she would change everything. The night stretched on, heavy and silent, with the promise of confrontation, of revelation, and of forces neither of them fully understood. Kaelira had survived the battlefield, but the true test had only just begun. And in the quiet darkness, both predator and prisoner sensed that their fates were now bound by anger, by power, and by something far more dangerous. The fragile, electric thread of recognition that connected two souls who were both alone, and yet destined to collide. Cliffhanger. Kalira's eyes closed, but sleep did not come. Somewhere in the shadows, she felt it a presence. Alive, and watching. Waiting for the moment she would have no choice but to step closer to the Alpha King. And she knew, deep down, that the moment she faced him fully, her world would change forever. The next morning, the fortress was alive with motion. Servants moved quickly through shadowed halls, and the distant clang of metal echoed from the armory. Kalira was brought out of her chamber, escorted through the vast corridors that seemed to breathe with the weight of centuries. The walls were carved with the stories of kings past, their faces frozen in stone, their eyes seeming to follow her as she walked. She did not resist. Every step was measured, every heartbeat alert. Kalira was not naive. She knew the Alpha King's fortress was a trap, a place of control and power. Yet, she could not ignore the strange pull she felt, the sense that, despite the danger, she had been brought here for more than punishment. Draven awaited her in the central hall, seated upon a throne of dark stone that seemed to grow out of the very floor. His eyes, sharp and unyielding, met hers as she entered. He did not rise. He did not speak immediately. Instead, he observed her, as one studies a storm about to break. "You have survived," he said finally, his voice calm but edged with authority. "Few have done what you did last night and lived to see dawn. You are remarkable." Kalira met his gaze evenly. "I did what I had to," she said. Her voice was steady, even as her body hummed with tension. "My people were destroyed. I will not forget." Draven's lips curled slightly, not a smile, but the hint of one. "Nor would I expect you to. Yet here you are, alive. And alive is exactly what you need to be, for the matters we must discuss." He rose, moving toward her with the quiet certainty of a predator who knows his prey is also a threat. Kalira did not flinch. She did not lower her eyes. She was a warrior, and she had learned long ago that fear is often a greater enemy than any sword. Draven's presence was overwhelming. He did not touch her, did not threaten her with his hands, but the sheer intensity of his gaze, the weight of his authority, pressed upon her like a physical force. And yet, beneath that power, Kalira sensed something else. A vulnerability he did not share lightly, a truth he hid behind the armor of command. "You are strong," he said, his voice quieter now, almost thoughtful, "and clever. But strength alone does not make one fit to survive in my kingdom. You must understand the power that rules here, or you will fall." Kalira's mind raced. She had faced kings before, generals, soldiers, but Draven was different. His authority was absolute, but it was not rooted merely in fear. There was intelligence, calculation, and... "I survive," she said finally, her tone deliberate. "Because I do what must be done. That is how I live, and how I will continue to live." Draven nodded slowly, as if he had expected no less. "Perhaps," he said, "and yet. The path you choose is lonely. It is filled with shadow. You have carried vengeance in your heart so long that I wonder if you even remember who you are beneath it." Kalira's eyes narrowed. "I remember," she said, her voice firm. "I am Kalira. I am the one who survived. I am the one who will not bow to a king, even an Alpha King." Draven's gaze sharpened, but there was no anger in it, only interest, and something more subtle. Something that made her stomach tighten. He stepped closer. Close enough that she could see the intensity in his eyes, but not so close as to be threatening. "Very well," he said. "Then you will remain here, under watch. not as a prisoner in chains, but as one who will learn what it means to walk within my world. And perhaps, learn what it means to trust, if that is even possible for someone like you. Kaelira's pulse quickened. Trust was not a word she had known for years. Trust was weakness. Trust could be betrayal. Yet there was an edge in Draven's voice, a promise unspoken that she could not ignore. For days, Kaelira observed the fortress, its rituals, its power. She saw soldiers trained to the edge of perfection, servants who moved with quiet efficiency, and hallways that hid both secrets and whispers. And always, Draven's eyes were upon her, watching not with cruelty, but with a tension that unnerved her more than any blade could. Their encounters were tense. Every word was a test. Every glance, a challenge. Kaelira refused to bow, refused to show weakness. Yet, she found herself drawn to him, compelled by something she did not understand. There was a quiet intelligence in him, a depth of thought and emotion that she had not expected in a king known for ruthlessness. One evening, the wind howled through the fortress, carrying with it the scent of rain and earth. Draven appeared at her chamber, unannounced, as he often did. She stood at the ready, expecting confrontation, yet he did not attack, did not command. He merely watched her. "You move well," he said finally, his voice soft. "Not just in battle, but in thought. You see what others miss. You understand danger, not merely in the blade, but in the mind. That is rare. That is powerful." Kaelira did not lower her guard. "And yet?" she asked, keeping her tone steady. Draven's eyes held hers. "And yet, power without understanding can destroy everything you hold dear. I have seen it. You have seen it. Perhaps, together, we might learn more than either of us alone." The words struck her in a way she did not expect. Together? Not as enemies, but as allies? And yet, the thought of alliance with the man whose soldiers had destroyed her life seemed impossible. And still, she could not deny the sense of possibility, the spark of something dangerous and compelling in the idea. Days passed, and Kaelira began to see the cracks in Draven's armor. Not literal cracks, but moments where his control faltered, where his weight of responsibility showed in subtle ways, a hesitation, a glance, a moment of silence that carried more meaning than any command. She began to understand that he was not merely a ruler of soldiers and stone, but a man burdened by the past, by choices, and by secrets he could not share. In turn, Draven began to see Kaelira for more than the warrior who had slaughtered his soldiers. He saw her grief, her determination, her fire. He saw someone who had suffered, yet refused to be broken. Someone who could challenge him, who could match him in skill and spirit. And he recognized in her a mirror of his own loneliness, a reflection of a soul shaped by loss and duty. It was during one quiet evening, as the sun dipped behind the fortress walls, that Kaelira overheard whispers of a plot. Soldiers and servants spoke in hushed tones of betrayal, of factions within the kingdom seeking to overthrow Draven, exploiting the chaos she had created in their ranks. Her heart raced. She realized that the danger was far from over, that her survival and Draven's rule were now intertwined in ways she had never anticipated. She faced a choice she had not expected: intervene to protect the man she had come to despise, or remain a bystander, letting her vengeance guide her alone. Her mind turned over the possibilities, weighing the consequences of action versus inaction. She had come for vengeance. Yet here she was, confronted with the fragile line between loyalty, survival, and the stirrings of something she dared not name. When Draven entered her chamber that night, sensing her unease, he did not speak immediately. He merely watched her. And in that silence, Kaelira felt both the weight of his presence and the pull of an unspoken connection. It was a dangerous tension, one that could tip toward trust or destruction, with a single choice. You have heard them, he said quietly, reading her thoughts. The shadows of the court move swiftly. And yet, I suspect you will not remain silent. Will you? Kalira met his gaze, knowing that her decision tonight would shape not only her future but the future of the kingdom itself. She could not deny the truth she felt in the depths of her being that her path was now bound with Draven's, whether she wished it or not. I will act, she said finally, her voice steady, though her heart pounded. Not for you. Not yet. But for what must be done. Draven inclined his head, a faint acknowledgement of understanding. Very well, he said. Tomorrow, we see how well you can survive not merely the battlefield, but the currents of power within these walls. You may yet find that strength alone is not enough. As the night deepened, Kalira lay awake, listening to the fortress breathe around her. Outside, the wind shook the stones, carrying whispers of storms and shadows. Inside, her mind raced with strategy, with caution, and with the impossible stirrings of curiosity and respect she could not name. The threads of fate were tightening, weaving her life with the Alpha Kings in ways neither could yet fully understand. The danger was real, the stakes higher than she had ever imagined, and the tension between them charged the air like lightning before a storm. Cliffhanger. As Kalira drifted into uneasy sleep, a shadow moved outside her chamber window, silent, deliberate, and watching. Someone, or something, was testing the boundaries of her newfound alliance with the Alpha King, and she knew, with a chill running down her spine, that the coming dawn would demand choices that could change the kingdom forever, and bind her heart in ways she could not yet foresee. The dawn broke over the fortress in muted shades of gold and gray, casting long shadows across the stone walls. Kalira rose from her narrow bed, the memory of last night's whispers still clinging to her mind. She had heard the murmurs of betrayal in the halls, whispers of soldiers and servants plotting against the Alpha King. It was a threat she had not expected to find so soon after her arrival, yet it confirmed what she had begun to suspect. Surviving here would demand more than skill with a blade. She moved through the corridors quietly, her steps careful as she observed the subtle movements of the fortress. Servants shifted nervously at her glance, and soldiers who once ignored her presence now stepped aside, wary of her reputation. Kalira's eyes were sharp, searching for clues in the flicker of shadows, the curl of whispered voices, the tension in the soldiers' stances. Draven awaited her in the council chamber, a space of polished stone and flickering torchlight. The room was filled with maps, documents, and the faint scent of parchment and wax. He stood near the large table, his posture straight and commanding, his expression unreadable. Kalira noticed the faint traces of fatigue beneath his dark eyes, the weight of responsibility pressing upon him like an invisible hand. You move like a shadow, Draven said without preamble, his voice calm but precise. Yet even shadows can be seen, if one knows where to look. Kalira's lips pressed into a thin line. I move to survive, she said, and to act when necessary. That is what I do best. Draven studied her, his gaze intense but not threatening. And act you will. But survival here requires more than strength. It requires understanding, patience, and the courage to see beyond anger. Kalira's heart tightened. Anger had been her guide for years, fueling her vengeance and her will to live. To see beyond it was something she had never considered. Yet she felt the truth in his words, even as her pride resisted them. The kingdom is in danger, Draven continued. Not from outside forces alone, but from within. There are those who seek power through treachery, exploiting every opportunity to strike when the walls are weak. And now, your actions have drawn attention. You are no longer invisible. They watch, and they wait. Kalira's mind raced. Her blade had slain his soldiers, and yet now she found herself being asked indirectly, subtly, to protect the man she had fought against. The thought was strange, uncomfortable, and yet, beneath her instinctive resistance, she sensed a stirring of purpose beyond vengeance. Draven moved closer, placing a hand lightly on a map that marked the positions of his forces. "I need someone I can trust," he said, his tone quiet, almost vulnerable. "Someone capable of seeing truth beyond fear. You are that person, Kaelira, whether you like it or not." Kaelira's pulse quickened. Trust. That word had been absent from her life for so long, replaced by anger, grief, and the certainty that reliance on others was weakness. And yet, she could not deny the strange gravity of his presence, the sense that her choice tonight could alter the course of the kingdom itself. "I do what must be done," she said finally, her voice firm. "For survival. For the kingdom. Not for you." Draven inclined his head, acknowledging her words. "Very well. But know this. Actions taken without understanding can destroy more than the enemy. They can destroy everything, including yourself." The day passed with tension woven into every moment. Kaelira shadowed the corridors, observed the soldiers, and listened carefully to the whispers that drifted through the fortress. Each fragment of conversation added pieces to the puzzle: names, loyalties, hints of plots that would erupt into chaos if ignored. And always, Draven's presence was near, watching, guiding, testing. By evening, Kaelira had gathered enough knowledge to act. She moved swiftly through the fortress, silently confronting the first signs of betrayal. Soldiers plotting in hushed tones froze at her appearance, their bravado crumbling before her quiet intensity. She gave no words, no warnings, only the weight of her gaze and the certainty of her skill. The warning was enough. When she returned to the council chamber, Draven was waiting. He did not praise her, did not scold her. He merely observed, as though measuring the distance between caution and audacity, between survival and alliance. "You have done well," he said finally. "And yet, the true danger is only beginning. The heart of the kingdom is a web of shadow and trust. One misstep, one moment of doubt, and it will all unravel." Kaelira's chest tightened. She had acted to protect the man she had once sought to destroy, and in doing so, she had felt an unfamiliar pull, the realization that her actions were no longer guided solely by vengeance. There was a new force at work within her, one that demanded consideration, reflection, and connection. The night deepened, and the fortress fell silent. Kaelira could hear the soft whisper of wind against stone and the faint murmur of guards patrolling the outer walls. She lay on her bed, mind restless, considering the delicate balance she now navigated. She had come seeking vengeance. She had found a man whose presence both challenged and intrigued her. She had stepped into a web of intrigue, betrayal, and power she had never anticipated. And she felt, in the deepest corners of her heart, that she could not turn away, even if she wished to. A sudden sound outside her chamber window made her sit upright. Footsteps, careful and deliberate, moved through the shadows. Kaelira's senses sharpened, her body tensing with readiness. She could not see the intruder, but she could feel the weight of intent in the air. Draven's voice broke the silence, quiet and measured. "You are not alone in this world, Kaelira. And sometimes, the enemy is not who you expect." Her heart pounded, not just with fear, but with a tension she did not fully understand. The fortress had become a stage for a game she did not yet know the rules to, and she realized that survival required more than strength or skill. It required judgment, courage, and the willingness to face truths she had long denied. Days turned into nights, and Kaelira's understanding of the fortress deepened. She observed not only the soldiers and servants, but also Draven himself. She began to see the cracks in his armor, moments of doubt, hesitation, and reflection that revealed the man beneath the king. He was not merely a ruler of stone and steel. He was a man shaped by duty, by loss, and by choices that weighed heavily on him. In turn, Draven observed Kaelira. He saw her resolve, her skill, her intelligence, and the fire that had driven her through the battlefield. He saw a warrior who was not merely driven by anger, but by principle, by a desire to act when the world demanded it. And slowly, he realized that she was more than a threat. She was a force capable of changing the kingdom, of challenging him, and perhaps, of teaching him truths he had long forgotten. It was during one quiet evening, with the wind moaning through the towers, that Kaelira and Draven met in the central hall, unannounced and unprepared. They faced each other in silence, the weight of the day's events pressing upon them. "You have survived much," Draven said finally, his voice calm but heavy with meaning. "And yet, the true test is only beginning. Will you continue to act with only your own strength, or will you learn to trust in what cannot be seen?" Kaelira's eyes met his, steady and unwavering. "I trust no one," she said. "And yet, I will act, for what must be done." Draven nodded, a faint acknowledgement of the complexity of her choice. "Very well," he said. "Tomorrow, the web of shadows will grow tighter. You will be tested, not merely by enemies, but by choices that challenge your heart, your mind, and your will. And you may find that survival is no longer enough." Kaelira's chest tightened as she considered his words. The fortress, the kingdom, and the Alpha King himself were no longer distant forces in her path. They were intertwined with her fate in ways she could not yet fully understand. And she sensed, with a mixture of anticipation and dread, that the coming days would demand courage, wisdom, and perhaps a willingness to see beyond vengeance. As she lay on her bed that night, listening to the fortress settle into silence, Kaelira felt the pull of something she could not name, a tension, a curiosity, and a subtle connection to the man who had once been her enemy. The threads of fate were weaving tightly, binding them together in ways neither could yet comprehend. Cliffhanger. A sudden shadow passed across the moonlight, streaming through her window. Swift and silent. Kaelira's instincts screamed that danger was near, and she realized that the challenges ahead would test not only her strength, but her heart. The choices she would make at dawn could decide not only her survival, but the fate of the Alpha King and his kingdom. And she knew, deep within, that she could not turn away, no matter how impossible the path ahead might seem. Dawn broke slowly over the fortress, washing the stone walls in pale gold light. Kaelira stood on the highest tower, her eyes scanning the horizon. The whisper of the wind carried the scent of the forest, of rain, and of something darker, the threat that had been growing in silence, waiting for the moment to strike. She felt the weight of choice pressing against her chest. The shadow of betrayal was real, and she could no longer remain on the sidelines. The fortress was alive with tension. Soldiers moved like shadows, silent and alert, and servants hurried through the halls, carrying messages that spoke of unrest and hidden plots. Kaelira knew that the events of this day would decide the fate of the kingdom, and that her actions would shape more than just the survival of one man. Draven met her at the council chamber, his expression sharp, his eyes dark and calculating. "They will come," he said, his voice low and steady. "The ones who wish to take the throne will act today. You know what is at stake." Kaelira nodded. Her hand rested lightly on the hilt of her blade, though she knew her skill alone would not be enough. The day would require more than strength. It would demand courage, wisdom, and trust in ways she had never known. "I understand," she said. "We must act together." Draven studied her for a long moment. There was no surprise in his eyes, only recognition of her skill, her courage, and the fire that had carried her through battles and betrayal alike. "Then we shall," he said. Together, the first signs of the conspiracy appeared by mid-morning. Shadows moved in the outer courtyards, soldiers and mercenaries drawn by the lure of power. Kaelira and Draven moved swiftly through the fortress, coordinating forces, setting traps, and preparing for confrontation. Their movements were precise, a silent partnership born of respect and necessity. As the first attackers breached the gates, Kaelira stepped forward, her blade flashing in the sunlight. She moved with a grace and certainty that left even the most skilled mercenaries reeling. Draven fought beside her, his strikes precise and deadly, yet always aware of her presence, their movements echoing one another in a silent rhythm. The battle was fierce, yet Kaelira's mind remained clear. Every step, every strike, was calculated not only for survival but for the protection of the kingdom and the man whose presence had become a strange and unspoken part of her life. She realized that the ties between them had deepened, woven not through words, but through shared struggle, trust, and the quiet understanding of strength and vulnerability. The shadowy conspirators were cunning, using traps and deception to try and turn the tide. Kaelira's awareness and insight allowed her to anticipate their moves, her strategy turning the battlefield into a stage where the forces of treachery faltered. She saw Draven move with a combination of authority and subtle caution, a man who had once seemed untouchable yet now revealed a depth of thought and care she had not expected. At one point, a group of attackers cornered Draven, their intent clear. Kaelira moved without hesitation, her blade a flash of light and steel. She struck decisively, scattering the assailants and placing herself between Draven and danger. In that moment, the silent connection between them flared an acknowledgement of trust and reliance that neither could fully voice. As the last of the attackers fell or fled, Kaelira and Draven stood in the courtyard, the air heavy with smoke and the scent of battle. Their eyes met across the distance, and in that silent exchange, the weight of the day's events settled upon them. They had survived not merely because of strength or skill, but because they had moved as one, a partnership forged in necessity and hardened by fire. Draven stepped closer, his expression unreadable, yet his presence carried a warmth and acknowledgement that spoke of something deeper than mere survival. "You have proven yourself," he said quietly, his voice low but steady, "not only as a warrior but as someone who can see beyond the edge of the blade." Kaelira's lips pressed into a thin line. "I did what had to be done," she said. Her chest rose and fell with the rhythm of battle, her mind alive with the clarity of purpose and the realization that her journey was far from over. Draven's gaze softened, though his eyes retained the strength and intensity that had defined him. "And yet, there is more than survival here, Kaelira. You have faced death, betrayal, and shadows beyond imagination. And still, perhaps it is time to see what can be built from this, from trust, from courage, from the bond forged between us." Kaelira felt a flutter of something she could not name, a strange tension between caution and curiosity. She had spent years walking the edge of vengeance, surviving by her skill and wit alone. And now, here in the aftermath of chaos, she felt the stirrings of a connection she had denied herself for so long. "Perhaps," she said finally, her voice quiet, "but it will take more than words to change what we are or what we have been." Draven nodded, acknowledging both her caution and the truth in her words. "I do not ask for your surrender," he said, "only your understanding. The world is full of shadows, and to walk it alone is to invite destruction. Together, perhaps, we can see the light beyond them." The fortress began to quiet as the threat was contained. Soldiers returned to their posts, and the last echoes of the battle faded into the walls of stone. Kaelira walked beside Draven through the halls, their steps in sync, their silence a reflection of shared understanding. She realized that the trust between them had grown not from words, but from action, from the willingness to face danger, to protect one another, and to recognize strength in unexpected forms. In the quiet of the evening, Kaelira found herself on the balcony, overlooking the forest. The wind carried the scent of rain, and the distant sound of rivers winding through the valley. She felt the weight of the day, of the battles fought, and of the choices made, and she felt the presence of Draven beside her. Not as a king commanding obedience, but as a man whose strength and vulnerability mirrored her own. "You have changed the course of more than a battle today," Draven said quietly. His gaze was fixed on the horizon, yet she could feel it upon her, steady and intense. "You have changed the course of this kingdom, and perhaps of yourself as well." Kaelira's chest tightened. She had come seeking vengeance, expecting only fire and death. And yet, she had found something more, a connection that defied the rules she had lived by, a recognition of strength, courage, and the possibility of something she had long denied herself: trust. "I have survived," she said quietly. "That is all I know. And surviving is not always enough," Draven said. "Sometimes, it is the courage to build, to trust, and to act for more than oneself that defines the future. And you, Kaelira, have shown both the courage to survive and the courage to face what comes next." The wind stirred, brushing against her hair and clothing. She closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the strange mix of exhaustion and clarity. The kingdom was safe for now, the conspirators defeated or scattered. But the lessons of the day were clear. Power is never absolute. Trust is a rare and dangerous gift. And connections forged in fire and struggle carry their own burdens and their own rewards. Draven's voice broke her thoughts. "There will be more battles," he said quietly. "More choices, and more tests. But know this, you are not alone. Not now, not ever, if you choose to walk this path with me." Kaelira opened her eyes and met his gaze, seeing the truth in the intensity and vulnerability reflected there. She had come to the fortress seeking vengeance, and found something she could never have anticipated. A bond formed through struggle, respect, and the recognition of strength in another soul. "Perhaps," she said finally, a faint hint of a smile brushing her lips, "we shall see what comes next." The fortress was quiet now, the last light of day fading into shadows that stretched across the stone walls. And in that quiet, Kaelira and Draven stood together. Not as king and prisoner, but as two souls bound by circumstance, courage, and the fragile, unspoken promise of trust. Cliffhanger for lasting tension. As they looked out over the forest, a distant figure appeared on the horizon, moving swiftly through the trees. Neither Kaelira nor Draven spoke, but both knew the truth. The kingdom's peace was fragile, and new dangers were approaching. And in the heart of that approaching storm, their bond would be tested once more not only by enemies but by the shadows of their own hearts.